Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retirement Redefined. I'm Brad Gotto, and I'm actually here by myself today, but we're going to be diving into Chapter 17 of The Psychology of Money, subtitled The Seduction of Pessimism. We're also going to take a closer look at how investors are reacting to this one big, beautiful bill act. It's a great example of how fear and headlines can drive behavior, and sometimes more than just the facts themselves. And just a quick reminder, if you have not listened to last week's episode with Tim Holland, be sure to check that out. We broke down what's actually in that bill and what it might mean for you from a planning perspective, as well as a look at the United States dollar. So go ahead and check that out for strategies moving forward. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Retirement Redefined. My name is Brad Gotto. I am normally joined either by a guest or at least my co-host, Carly Carlson. But today, it's kind of sad. I'm by myself. I'm recording this episode solo today because at the end of the day, guys, we promise you guys 2 episodes a month, and there are just times where calendaring just doesn't work out to get Carly and I together for every single episode. And so, with her busy schedule, I am here by myself recording episode. I was going to give you the episode number, but I have no idea what episode number we're on. So, but welcome back to the podcast. If you're new to the podcast, we're happy to have you. I know we're getting close to episode 100, somewhere around there. So feel free to dig back into past episodes and learn even more. But today we're going to continue a series that we started, I want to say 3 years ago. And it's this walk through the book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. If you have not yet read this book, I would greatly recommend, I guess I would say, which is obvious because I'm spending the time in our podcast to go through this chapter by chapter. Wonderful book on exactly what it sounds like, The Psychology of Money. There are 20 chapters to this book, and Morgan, in every one of these chapters, kind of breaks down one of these psychological things that we tend to deal with. And so every now and again, we sprinkle one of these in. And so today we're going to tackle, or when I say we, it's me. It's just me today. I'm going to attempt to tackle Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism. The subtitle is Optimism Sounds Like a Sales Pitch. Pessimism sounds like someone trying to help you. This is pretty timely. Because like I said at the beginning of this, we're not that far removed from a major piece of legislation at a congressional level, the one big, beautiful bill act. It's hard to even say. And obviously headlines everywhere about this, most of which are pessimistic. And so what a time to dive into Morgan's chapter, The Seduction of Pessimism. I'll just start out by saying this. He has this quote here at the beginning from a historian. It says, "For reasons I have never understood, people like to hear that the world is going to hell." You guys, I think this is true. I think that fear sells better than optimism. And it's not to say that you and I, as human beings, don't like puppies and nice things. It's that when we read headlines, articles, or talk to our neighbor over the fence, or talk to our spouse or whoever, our circles, the water cooler at the office. What tends to dominate those conversations is pessimism. And it's interesting because an optimist, somebody that's like truly optimistic, which by definition does not mean that you think everything is going to go perfectly. You just think, by definition, as an optimist, that the chances things go right are better than the chances things go wrong. That doesn't mean that everything is going to be perfect or that you snap a chalk line and everything's just up and to the right at all times, whether it's your portfolio, your career, your kids and their humanity and ability to learn and interact with you and other people. Insert whatever you want. Optimism is definitely not this thought process that everything is just up and to the right perfectly. Again, just by definition, this thought that the odds that things go better than go worse are just true. Yet, as humans, we tend to get stuck in the pessimistic side. In fact, I will share with all of you that this just happened to me this morning. I was actually on the phone or on a Zoom call with my tax people, talking not about any of my clients or planning concepts that we're working on from a tax perspective, actually talking about my own taxes, my own personal taxes, and kind of figuring out first half of the year, how did it all go? Second half of the year, what are we expecting? And when it came time to actually make decisions of how I'm going to kind of plan out the rest of the year from a tax perspective, and what am I going to pay to the IRS, and how am I going to save money to make sure that I don't run into a spot next April when the bill comes due, so to speak. I took this exact approach. And so when I was prepping for this podcast today, I was like, you got to be kidding. I just did this. I was this person. I was the person that got stuck in the pessimistic camp and thought, you know what? I just want to prepare for the worst case scenario, because if I'm wrong and it ends up any better than that, then I'm just going to feel really good. In fact, I would argue that that is a default setting for me, that I love to be the person that's like, you know what? I'm going to expect nothing or very little out of anything in life. And so that way I can feel really good. The fear around optimism, of course, is the opposite, where you expect good things to happen over time. Not always, like I talked about before, but then they don't. And then it feels like a letdown. But as a financial advisor, for all of you personally, as you're doing your financial planning, of course, there's a problem with this thought process. And the major problem is if we always start with this default setting of pessimism, we essentially, from a planning perspective, have to build a hyper defensive plan that doesn't allow you to live life to the fullest. And then you end up that person that's 80, 90, 100 years old, however old you are at kind of the end of your life, that looks back upon their life and says, gosh, I wish I would have just done more. I wish I would have taken more risks here. I wish I would have enjoyed this part of my life more. And a lot of that stems back to this thought process of optimism versus pessimism. So I just want to now, this time, the first paragraph in this chapter, I think, is just worth reading verbatim. So I'm quoting from the book. It just says, optimism is the best bet for most people because the world tends to get better for most people most of the time. But pessimism holds a special place in our hearts. Pessimism is just more common than optimism. It also sounds smarter. It's intellectually captivating, and it's paid more attention than optimism, which is often viewed as being oblivious to risk. So I want to address this right now, because what Morgan is saying here is, if you're talking to somebody, and I'm just going to talk about the markets because it's near and dear to our hearts here at Fiat and wealth management and comprehensive planning, and it's kind of a big part of the puzzle, right? And so when it comes to markets, when you encounter a random person or somebody that you respect or know really well, or anybody in between, and they've got this overly optimistic attitude. In fact, one of my college buddies, I'm now far removed from college, but I have a really good group of college buddies that I stay in contact with. One of my buddies is one of these people. He's overly optimistic about Bitcoin. He's a big Bitcoin guy. And I talk to him on the regular about it. And if I gave you, I don't even want to quote him because I think I would misquote. And two, it might sound a little bit ridiculous, but his level of optimism relative to where Bitcoin is going to go and the decisions that he's making in his life around that just sound ridiculous. I'm not saying he is ridiculous, or I'm not even saying he's wrong. I'm just saying when you hear them come out of his mouth, it's like, okay, that's ridiculous. That's probably not going to happen. It's like talking to a golfer who's a, average bogey golfer, or shot 100 on their last round, who's so optimistic that the next round that they go out, they're going to shoot, a 75. They just sound ridiculous. Almost sometimes like a used car salesman. We're so optimistic that it feels like I'm selling you because I'm trying to convince you that things are going to be really good and you should buy into that. Whereas on the opposite side of that, if you meet somebody who's pessimistic, it almost sounds intellectually superior. Like, hey, this person has dug into something, not necessarily true, and through whatever information they have or knowledge they have or studying that they've done, they have found flaws or they've found reasons for us to be cautious. And it's interesting when we meet these people, we don't kind of shove them off as just like, oh, that's cute, and they just don't really know what they're talking about. We think of them as intellectually superior. I think part of this, as a human being, you guys, just goes down to the base level of we've all been through some stuff, right? Everybody listening to this episode and everybody that you know has been through some stuff. And when we go through things in life, we tend to go, okay, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, that type of deal. So I'm not going to get fooled again. And so then we start to put up these barriers and we start to walk more cautiously through life in a lot of ways. And so a great example of this, of course, is 2008 and 2009. It's something that everybody listening to this episode has lived through, whether you were investing at that time or not, deep into your career at that time or not, retired already, or whatever it may be. We all lived through it. And to put some perspective on that, started late 07, finished in end of Q1. I think March 6, 2009 was the bottom of the market. And from there, it started to come back. But interestingly enough, if you think about being in the middle of that, how many people could have guessed? I mean, or if I said to you, as an example, in the beginning of 2009, as the S&P is off over 50%, and the Wall Street Journal at the end of 2008 had published, and this is, Morgan quotes this in his book as well, the Wall Street Journal, which is the largest, most probably the most respected financial publication, not just in the US, probably in the world, posted a front page article, you guys. Wasn't on the fourth page or anywhere deep into the Wall Street Journal. On the front page, an article by a Russian professor. His name, I'm probably not saying this right, Igor Panarin. And his economic views are written in here. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. This is what he said. And this is no joke. This is the end of 08, and this is on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. He said around the end of June 2010, which at that time is about a year and a half away, or early July, Panarin says the U.S. will break into 6 pieces, with Alaska reverting to Russian control. California will form the nucleus of what he calls the California Republic and will be part of China and under Chinese influence. Texas will be the heart of the Texas Republic, a cluster of states that will go to Mexico or fall under Mexican influence, so on and so forth. And he kind of goes through where all these 6 different territories are going to go. Not only did he write this, which today to us in 2025 sounds absolutely insane. It's like, what? Yeah, it was bad. But to think that the result of where the economy was going, and at this point in time, at the end of 08, things weren't getting better. We weren't on the upswing yet. They were still getting worse and worse. To write an article that then gets published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, basically saying it was the end of the United States. This is it. This is where everything breaks apart. The United States is going to cease to exist as a country the way that it does today. And as crazy as that sounds to us, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And people bought into it. I was a newly minted financial advisor. I got into the financial services industry in 2006, and it was late 2006. So this is like probably Q4. I don't remember exactly when I started, but I think around Q4 2006. 2007, end of 2007 is when this pullback or this recession started to happen. So I'm a year into my career, coming off the back of being a youth pastor. So I don't exactly have a ton of like financial advisor experience or financial experience at that point in time. And so if you think about it, this is a 16-month drawdown. My first 28 months in the career, less than 3 years, the vast majority of which was the worst recession this country has seen since the Great Depression. And at that time, the pessimism around the fact that this was it, and the Wall Street Journal publishing these crazy articles like this on their front page was insane. But pessimism feels smart. It feels smart to kind of board yourself up and not risk things. And like I said before, optimism sounds kind of cheap or chintzy. He also says in this book, and I just want to read this, tell someone that everything will be great, and they're likely to either shrug you off or offer a skeptical eye. Tell someone they're in danger, and you have their undivided attention. Now we are, from 2009 till today, we're 16 years removed from that. I'm now in my 19th year in financial services. And you all know now, 15 years later, 16 years later, not only did we come out of it, but the returns of the S&P or the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ or any major indice in the last 16 years have been insane. What the economy has done, what our country has done, the growth of our GDP, you name it, by any metric that you can point to, it has been a phenomenal 16 years. Nobody would have guessed that. In fact, on the other side of this, I want to read something else from the book. So coming out of World War II, Japan obviously not in a great position, obviously had just surrendered to the Allied forces in the mid-1940s. And then not only were they dealing with all kinds of economic strife coming out of the war, they were gutted from World War II, both economically, industrially, culturally, socially. And then to add more pain or more misery, that winter in 1946 after World War II was brutal, and it caused a famine that basically the average Japanese family could only eat 800 calories per person per day. Now, imagine this. If at that point in time, the lead newspaper in Japan, whatever newspaper that is, not something like the Wall Street Journal, had published an article that said this: "Chin up, everyone. Within our lifetime, our economy will grow to almost 15 times the size it was before the end of the war. Our life expectancy will nearly double. Our stock market will produce returns like any country in history is rarely ever seen. We will go more than 40 years without ever seeing unemployment top 6%. We will become a world leader in electronic innovation and corporate managerial systems. And before long, we will be so rich that we will own some of the most prized real estate in the United States. Americans, by the way, will be our closest ally, and they will try to copy our economic insights." Can you imagine being a Japanese person in 1946 and reading an article that says that in the newspaper? It would get laughed at. It would get mocked. It would get ridiculed. But we all now know, 80 years later, that's exactly what happened. What I just read is exactly what happened to Japan in the following decades. But again, optimism just doesn't sell the way that pessimism does. And so I want to kind of wrap up by going through these three other ancillary reasons why I think, or at least Morgan in his book talks about why pessimism is so much more powerful than optimism, and then just close with some practical advice. And what does this mean for you, as an American family in 2025, trying to do the best that you can with your finances and listening to a financial podcast? What do we do with this information? And so these three ancillary points first. Number one is that money is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? So something bad happening tends to affect everyone, and it captures everyone's attention. And so if you think about it, any negative thing that happens with money doesn't isolate itself to a certain segment of the population, right? I'm not trying to say that these are I want to be careful here. When we have natural disasters, and they're terrible and people die, it's absolutely horrible, but it doesn't affect everybody. It just affects the people that were in that part of the country that happen to have that natural disaster. And so while it makes headlines, it doesn't draw the same level of fear as stuff with money does. Because again, money is everywhere. It affects everybody. To use the word that Morgan uses, like I said before, it's ubiquitous. And so because of that, fear around money, or things like recessions or loss of money in stock, or just banks not making the right decisions with your money, or whatever it may be, tend to get exaggerated. Point number two. Another is that pessimists often extrapolate present trends without accounting for how our economy or our markets adapt. In other words, said differently, the pessimistic mindset, or kind of that side of the coin, kind of take what has happened in the past and go, hey, look, this is what happened in the past, and so that's got to be what happens in the future. And they don't give any credence to how we adapt or how markets adapt. I think one of the biggest areas where I've seen this play out was even in 2008, 2009, as I could barely spell financial advisor. I was so new in the industry. I barely knew what I actually did for the families that I served. And at that time, trying to deal with the emotional roller coaster that was the worst pullback since the Great Depression. And guess what everybody was doing? They were comparing what was going on in our economy to the Great Depression and just assuming that we were going to end up in a similar or same position, which if you were unfamiliar and have not studied the Great Depression, there was a 90% pullback in the markets. 90% of the value of the markets disappeared. And because there was a lot of things that you could point to that were the same or similar or trending in that direction, people go, hey, look at these similarities. We're going to end up in the exact same spot. Now, I'm not saying a 53% pullback isn't bad. It is, but it's not 90, and it's not even close. And one of the things, to Morgan's point in the book here about how not giving account to how markets adapt and learn, is social welfare programs. One of the things we didn't have in the 1930s, late 1920s, early 1930s, was any social welfare programs. Things like unemployment or Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, things like this, to make sure that there are social safety nets for people that need them, or if things get bad. And so without those social safety nets, and if you think about it, like without a safety net and you fall and there's no net, it's going to hurt a lot more. If you have a safety net, it's not that you didn't fall, it's just that there's something there to try to catch you and take some of that pain away. And so things like that are an example of, hey, look, yes, it looks the same, but we adapt and we learn. And through these learnings, not going to have as significant of pain through this new market cycle, recession, economic policy, or whatever it may be. Third and final point here is progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. Recessions, pullback in the markets, they tend to be 2 years or less. Whereas bull markets and a full bull market cycle can be over a 5 to 7 year period. So to Morgan's point in the book, it is easier to focus in on short term, especially when things go bad. They tend to do it very quickly. And when things go well, it tends to take time. We all know this. I'll just admit it. I'm one of those people. I fluctuate weight on my frame about 20 to 25 pounds on a pretty regular basis, which to some people may not sound like a lot, but I don't, for my height and my frame size, that's a lot of difference in weight to be carrying around. And when I'm on the bad end of that, and that extra weight is coming on, that happens pretty quickly. I don't have to think about it very much. It just kind of, if I don't work on a consistent basis, very quickly I will gain weight. And the process it takes to get it back off, the positive side of things, it takes much longer. And I feel all of that. And that's the way a lot of things are in life. When you snap a chalk line from any point in time in the past to today, the question around, is it better than it was before? Financially, economically? The answer is yes. As a country, over the last 250 years, have we had pullbacks? Have we had setbacks? Absolutely. But if you snap a chalk line and you look over the long term, we're crushing it. We're crushing it. And by all accounts, I read the hypothetical article about that somebody would have put in the newspaper after World War II for Japan and thought, by any account, anybody would have thought that's absolutely insane and crazy. But if you wrote the story in America of what's happened post 08 and 09, not only do we not break up and become 6 independent countries or 6 different pockets that are now part of other countries under other countries' control, our economic growth, our GDP growth, our market growth, market capitalization, again, by any account, is absolutely amazing. You go back even further to the beginning of this country and just think about what we were trying to do. And as a country and where we're at today, nobody would believe it. Absolutely nobody would believe it. And so, practically speaking, what do you do from a financial planning perspective, knowing that your pessimistic voice is always going to be louder? And not only that, everybody around you's pessimistic voice is always going to be louder. So the smart move is always going to feel like going with the crowd. And if the crowd is pessimistic, that's where you're going to want to go. So how do you impart some level of optimism in a smart way into your financial planning? I think part of that just comes down to having a coach. These days in sports, you guys, every top athlete still has coaches. And one of the things that's become more popular than even like coaches dealing with technique of how to like swing your golf club better or swing your tennis racket better or how to run your routes better in football or whatever it may be is the psychological coach, the one that's teaching you how to deal with your thoughts in between your ears so that you can play the game better from a behavioral standpoint and from a psychological standpoint. I think that having somebody in your corner that's willing to be optimistic, that doesn't mean that we think everything's going to go awesome all the time, but it's just optimistic and just saying, look, snap a chalk line. I do think 10 years from now, things will be better than they are today. Having somebody in your corner that at least gives you that voice or lets you hear that voice and understand that it's good to have both, but we shouldn't overweight the optimism the same way, or overweight the pessimism rather, the same way that the world tends to. It can lead to a lot of bad decisions from a financial planning perspective. And so I'll just close by saying this. One of the things that when it comes to financial planning, I'm an optimist. The way I try to lead fiat is through optimism. I think that generally speaking, the families that we work with and that we help, that things are going to be better tomorrow than they are today. That as long as you grant me the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, which if you listen to this podcast for any length of time, if you've been around me for any length of time, that is one of my favorite things to say. As long as you grant me that the world doesn't blow up, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, generally speaking, things tend to get better over time. And how do we build a financial plan that keeps that kind of stuff in mind? Doesn't mean we're not setting guardrails. Doesn't mean we're not putting airbags in. Doesn't mean we're not cognizant of the fact that things can go wrong, especially in the short term. Because when they go wrong, they tend to go wrong pretty quickly. But how do we build a plan that takes advantage of that long-term optimism, but is cognizant of the possibility of short-term pessimism? I just want to close with this line. At the end of the chapter, Morgan says this: expecting things to be bad is the best way to be pleasantly surprised even when they're not, which ironically is something to be optimistic about. I love it. You guys, behavioral finance is a big part of financial planning. Understanding where to be optimistic, where to sprinkle in that pessimism like salt and pepper is really, really important outside of just the spreadsheet. Spreadsheets deal with numbers. They don't deal with emotions. They don't deal with this idea or concept that the human being is subject to thinking on the whole that things are going to be bad. But that's what comprehensive financial planning is all about, is incorporating that kind of stuff into that spreadsheet. And so with that being said, thanks for joining us for this episode of Retirement Redefined. If you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, I would encourage you to do so so that you can be notified when new episodes come out. If you are so inclined to share our podcast with the people that you care about the most, so then give it a listen as well. We would appreciate that. And we'll see all of you on our next episode.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.